Now we will have the Chairman of the Research Grants Council, Professor Benjamin Wah, to share with us the roles of the RGC in providing research support to the UGC sector. Professor Wah, please.
Good afternoon. I'd like to add my welcome for you to come to this session today. And this year marks the 25th year of the RGC. RGC was set up in 1991 to fund research for the sector. Actually, at that time, the amount of money that we had is very small. And you may wonder, before the RGC, we actually have a committee called the University and Polytechnic Grants Committee, UPGC, before 1991. So this is part of the history. And today, what we like to do is I would make a short presentation giving you some of the details of the operations and the committees of the RGC. Then we would go through the parallel sessions. We would then ask the 5 panel chairs to come back, and they're going to talk about the assessment process, selection criteria, who should apply for the Humanities and Social Science Procedures Fellowship Scheme, and what should PI do when resubmitting proposals, and the research misconduct and improprieties. So this will take around 40 minutes for the individual panel chairs to go through. And finally, we would wrap up the session with around 45 minutes of Q&A. So this is approximately the rundown of what we would do today. So let me go to my talk here. My talk will be divided into 4 parts. First, the operation, the funding portion, which Dr. Armour has alluded to briefly earlier, the different funding schemes, and assessment and monitoring. So first, let's look at the operations. As I said earlier, RGC was set up in 1991. The terms of reference of RGC consists of 2 parts. One is as an advisory body to advise the government through the UGC on the academic research needs of the UGC-funded higher education institutions. So recently we have also included the self-financing institutions, which are beyond the UGC-funded higher education institutions. So the first part is advisory, and the second part is mostly operational, to review proposals, to monitor the outcomes, review and approve the awards of fellowships, and operate new research funding schemes for the local self-financing degree sector. So this the terms of reference consists of 2 parts. We have altogether 10 local academics serving in the RGC or the council members, 3 local lay members, and then 12 external academics from overseas. So it is roughly half and half between local versus overseas members serving in the council. So the local members would give you the perspective on the needs of the local institutions, but the overseas academics may provide us with experience on the best practice to administer the research grants and the proposals. So the structure consists of the following committees. On your left-hand side, we have the Major Project Steering Committee, which oversees the theme-based research, as well as the AOE research scheme. Then the mid-size funding comes from the Collaborative Research Funds, and this is overseen by the CRF committee. Then there is the Hong Kong PhD Fellowships Committee, which actually we do the reviews and help the UGC to select the Hong Kong PhD Fellows. On the right-hand side, we have 5 subject panels. This consists of the biology and medicine, business studies, engineering, HSS, and the physical sciences. So this is responsible for managing the GRF schemes, the ECS schemes, HSS, PFS, and then the joint research schemes with mainland China and other countries. So this is done, actually all this are done by the volunteers, the academics in the subject panels. And finally, recently in the last 2 years, we have also set up research schemes for the self-financing degree sectors, in this case mostly private institutions, So we operate three types of schemes: the faculty development scheme, similar to the GRF; the institutional development scheme, which actually provides the infrastructure support to the self-financing institutions; and finally, some smaller schemes for operating workshops, conferences, called the inter-institutional development scheme. So the manpower in the processing of grant applications consists of a large part of the support is done by the UGC and RGC Secretariat, which consists of 30 non-academic staff helping to process the proposals, collecting the reviews, managing the meetings, and so on. And also the electronic system, which you should all be familiar with. In the middle, the green square here consists of the assessment panel and the committees. We have 5 subject panels, 2 committees comprising of about 100 local academics and 130 overseas experts. So therefore, the panels and the committees is roughly half and half between local versus overseas. It processed around 3,000 applications under 13 different funding schemes from a pool of around 4,500 eligible academics every year. Actually, in the last RAE exercise, we actually accounted for the exact number of academics in Hong Kong, and believe it or not, the number is not 4,500, but 4,444. That's the number of academics in Hong Kong qualified to apply for the RAE last year. So therefore, the annual research budget is around $1.1 billion. And of course, we have a large pool of external review support consisting of 13,000 external reviewers and solicited every year by invitation to process the proposals. So this is actually the body of volunteers and staff responsible for processing and awarding all the proposals and the grants. The second part of my talk is on the funding for the RGC. And as Dr. Armour said earlier, we have the Research Endowment Fund. And this was set up in 2009 with initially $18 billion. And then it was topped up in 2012 to 13 by an additional $5 billion, in which $3 billion is designated for the self-financing degree sector. So assuming that we have 5% return every year, for the $20 billion, it would give us $1 billion per year for funding, and then the self-financing degree sector would have $150 million every year for research funding. Now, of course, in the first few years, the interest or the return is over 5%. Actually, at that time, it was around 6%. Now we are expecting that there may be a downturn, and the interest return is expected to be around 4% in the coming years. So therefore, we need to be careful in spending our money in the next few years. Now, you can look at the total amount of funding. It has always been increasing. In the years like from 2009 to 2012, the money has increased from $657 million to around $700 million. And then an additional part of the bar here consists of the on-cost, or in that case, the overhead. But since 2012 to 13, the on-cost and the PI costs are now coming from the R portion through a competitive basis. And therefore, the solid bar here represents the principal or the amount of money that has been awarded through the research grants. So as exactly you can see here, the money has been increasing in the last 4 years to around $890 million this year. So next, let me talk about the research different funding schemes. First of all, the important part here is that there is the subject panels. And the subject panels, as I said earlier, there are 5 subject panels. They are responsible for reviewing for the GRF, the ECS, as well as the HSS PFS scheme, as well as the joint research scheme. So in the next few slides, let me go through some of them. So in the GRF, this is really the bread and butter of all the institutions' funding in terms of small proposals, small grants today. So this is to supplement the institution's own research support and accounts for 70% of the earmarked research grant budget. The earmarked research grant budget research grants consist of the GRF, the ECS, the CRF, HSS PFS, as well as the joint research scheme. So the funding is normally goes for 2 to 3 years, and this year we have received 25 proposals. So if you divide this by 4, you get around 61%, meaning that 61% of all the academics, full-time academics this year are applying to GRF in research for research funding. So last year, I think we funded $594 million for 946 research projects with a success rate of 35%. Success rate is actually quite respectable. Some people may ask, like, should we be increasing the success rate or should we be increasing the funding? Because the money is coming from the endowment, so we don't have any flexibility of increasing or asking for more money. So whenever we increase the success rate, this would actually decrease the size of each funded proposal. So it is really a balance that we have to strike in between the success rate and the size of each research grant. The funded amount goes between 100,000 Hong Kong dollars to $1.7 million per project last year. So the funding in the 2015 to 16, as I said earlier, is around $600 million. The largest portion goes to engineering, which is $179 million. Then this is followed by biology and medicine, 27%. And then the next two parts are evenly split between physical sciences and the humanities and social sciences. The smaller part of this, 7%, goes to the business studies panel. So this is approximately how the GRF money is divided, with a 35% of success rate overall. Next, in the early career scheme, this was introduced in 2012 to 13. This is very important because in the old days, we have what we call the green proposals. They have a green cover sheet, and the proposal are all printed on green paper. But since 2012 to 13, we have initiated a new scheme called the ECS, which is used to support junior researchers. And this is very important because junior researchers, when they first join Hong Kong's institutions, may not be as competitive as the senior researchers, and therefore we would actually want to give some protection to them for them to compete among themselves to get funding. So the funding is around $100,000 per project to $1 million. And this is, so this is awarded with a going over a period of 2 to 3 years. And in 2015 to 16, 381 applications were received with a success rate of 40% overall. So you can see that the success rate here is actually higher than the normal GRF. If you count everything together, the GRF and the ECS together, around 70% of the academics in Hong Kong are now submitting proposals this year for research funding. So you can see that actually a large portion of the academics are now submitting proposals. So again, the portion that the $91 million, the large part, believe it or not, it actually has gone to HSS. 33% went to HSS last year. This is followed by engineering, biology and medicine, and physical sciences, about even, and then the smaller part is the business studies. So this is approximately how the money is divided. Next, there is the HSS Prestigious Fellowship Scheme. This is really to recognize outstanding HSS academics. The amount of funding is approximately $1 million per year, with the total amount that we have reserved, 10 awards per year. So it's around $10 million per year for funding. Really, for HSS academics, their most requested funding is to have release time. That is, they usually do not have to ask for a lot of lab space, consumables, research assistant support, but more in terms of release time. So this amount of money is used to support release time for senior academics or for prestigious academics to have some time to do their own research, possibly in outside of the institutions or even in some other institutions. So this is something that we will support them to do the research, to have some release from their normal teaching duties. We have also the joint research schemes. This is joined with other countries, and we supported 3 different types of support. One is the project support. Next would be the fellowship, and the last one would be travel schemes, travel support. First one, the majority of the money goes to the NSFC of China. This is actually around $25 million every year, used to support joint research projects between Hong Kong academics and mainland academics. So proposals must be submitted jointly by academics from both sides, and then they are reviewed together. Then we have actually 6 schemes with the European countries. 2 of them are project schemes, and 4 of them are mobility scheme or just travel support. The second scheme with the French National Research Agency is a research project scheme with a maximum support of $3 million per project. And then the European Commission Horizon 2020, this was set up this year with a total funding cap of $3 million per project. And again, this is something new that we set up this year to have joint support with the Horizon 2020 through the ERC in Europe. So those 2 are the project support, and then the other 3 schemes are basically mobility schemes or travel support. Finally, in the fellowship support, we have the Fulbright Scholars Fellowship support with the United States. Again, there will be selection of junior fellows and senior fellows support every year. We have actually increased the budget for joint research schemes from $25 million in 2011 to 12 to $42 million in 2015 to 16. So you can see that we have actually been putting in more support to support collaborations, because we know the importance of collaboration with overseas countries. Statistics have shown that collaborative papers with overseas institutions usually get more visibility and impact, which is measured in terms of citations in the science, engineering, and medicine area. We normally have seen that they are usually have higher citations when it is collaborated with overseas institutions and researchers. So therefore, we have increased the support in collaboration, and we realize the importance of collaborations. Next, we have the CRF scheme. This is actually managed by the CRF committee. The CRF normally goes between 3 to 5 years, running between $2 million to $10 million per project. We actually have the CRF meeting or the symposium this year, in which we invited researchers from the last who have gotten CRF grants in the last 2 years to report their progress. Success rate there is around 19%. In fact, we have lifted the quota from institutions in the last 2 years, and therefore it has led to a significant increase in the number of submissions. And also we have proportionally increased the amount. The total amount of funding this year is $110 million. So depending on the need, we may actually put in more support, because again, we realize the importance of collaborations. And collaborations is not only collaborations with institutions outside of your own institutions. We realize the importance of collaborations even within an institution, even with your academics, the academics next door. So collaborations is not limited to, should not be limited, but we want to have genuine collaborations to develop collaborative research. Next, there is the Major Project Steering Committee, the theme-based and the AOE schemes. The theme-based are large-scale projects funded up to 5 years, and the range of funding goes between $13 million to $75 million per project. And this year we have actually made some recommendation because we have added an additional theme. The theme is on areas that are of importance to Hong Kong. We purposely have left this area to be quite dynamic and open so that new areas can be added in the future depending on the need. And this year we are looking at schemes, for example, like smart cities, e-learning, and big data. Those are examples of areas that are of interest. But these areas may actually change from year to year depending on the needs in Hong Kong. We also have make a requirement this year that, or at least have a recommended budget amount of around $40 million for the TRS scheme. Because of the fact we have added an additional project or additional theme this year, we are actually trying to increase the budget, the total budget cap for the total amount of funding for the TRS from $200 million to around $230 million. So this will be discussed in the RGC meeting this week. So this is around $200 million, which is derived from the interest return from the endowment, research endowment fund, and we are trying to increase it to around $230 million. We also asked for 10% matching from the institutions. So altogether, we hope to increase the amount and to increase the number of projects that could be funded under this scheme. Next, there is the AOE scheme. This actually started in the late 90s. Initially, we have only $80 million, but now we have actually increased it to I think about $90 million every year. And this, because the amount of money is not large enough to fund more than 2 projects every year. So therefore, as a result, we were not able to have call for proposal for the AOE scheme every year. At this point, the decision is to call for proposals every 2 years, so that we would be able to fund 4 to 5 projects every 2 years. Now, with the introduction of a new theme in the TRS scheme, we hope that we can actually increase these. We could encourage submissions from areas other than biology and medicine, science and engineering, but to encourage support, for example, from humanities and social sciences, business studies, education, and so on. So we would actually like to see more proposals coming from those areas submitted under the AOE scheme. So this call for proposal will be coming out, and we would have call for proposal for funding in the next year. Then there is the Hong Kong PhD Fellowship Scheme. Again, this is managed by the Hong Kong PhD Fellowship Steering Committee. This is actually funded by the UGC block grant. The objective is to attract the best and the brightest students globally to pursue PhD studies in Hong Kong. In working with the committee, the opinion or the comments from the committee members is that the scheme has attracted the best student that any place can attract. So therefore, the committee members are actually deans and provosts from top universities overseas. And what their comment is that this scheme is now able to attract the best student to apply to Hong Kong. The stipend is actually quite generous, better than the RPG student. It consists of $20,000 per month and a conference grant of $10,000 per year. The support goes to only 3 years, and beyond the 3 years, institutions need to pick up the additional support. Finally, I want to talk about the assessment and the monitoring. As I said earlier, the subject panels and the panels actually are two of those subject panels are divided into sub-panels, engineering and humanities and social sciences. Because of the workload and the diversity of the areas, so for those 2 subject panels, they further divide the panel into smaller subject panels so that you can better manage the proposals within each subject panel. The assessment is via the peer review mechanism. The program directors or the panel chairs do not make decisions, but they are all based on the peer review process, and they discuss the funding recommendations in the subject panels. So this consists of 103 local panel members and 110 non-local members. So the mix is between about 50-50 between local versus non-local. The local members are important because they would give the committee the perspective of the situation in Hong Kong. So therefore, we really value very much the opinion or the comments from the local members. We also want to have non-local members, so in case that there is conflict of interest, the non-local members can step in because they won't have any conflict of interest. Normally, they don't have any conflict of interest unless they are working with local institutions, at which time they have to declare the conflict of interest. We have 14,000 active reviewers in our database, and every year we solicited around 13,000 reviews from this reviewer pool. Second is the handling of conflict of interest. This is very important and seriously managed in the RGC because we don't want to have any conflict of interest. Now, normally the conflict of interest is not real but perceived. We want to avoid true conflict of interest, and also we want to avoid perceived conflict of interest. So therefore, this is the part that needs to be very strictly adhered to. So the mechanism of avoiding conflict or perceived conflict or real conflict of interest is that there is a code of conduct is in place to set up the standard of behavior expected of members, any committee members or council members in handling council's business. The assessment panels and the committees are chaired by non-local members, so presumably they won't have any conflict of interest. And myself, as the RGC chair, being a local academic, is not involved in the assessment of any grant proposal. And normally I would not speak out when proposals are reviewed, and only I would speak out if I was asked to do so on procedural grounds, mainly to clarify on certain procedures that the committee wishes to clarify. So the rules to manage the conflict of interest is that a council or the panel member should report his or her conflict of interest by completing and updating a register of interest and declare this on a case-by-case basis. We ask panel members and committee members to avoid putting himself or herself in a position that may lead to an actual perceived conflict of interest. And we ask panel members not to make a comment on proposals from applicants with affiliation from the same institution without permission, and not to assess application in which the person is associated with, and not taking part in the decision-making process when there is a conflict of interest. So those are the explicitly written rules for the conflict of for avoiding real or perceived conflict of interest. Finally, there is the monitoring and assessment of funded projects. Project holders are required to submit progress reports as well as completion reports, and they will be evaluated at the end to give a score from the panel members whether the research is satisfactory, barely satisfactory, or unsatisfactory. Statistics shows that the category of unsatisfactory or barely satisfactory proposals is around 10% of those completed projects. And this actually is important because you want to complete your project satisfactorily. For those that are not completed satisfactorily, there may be deduction of scores or scores from proposals that you submit in the future. So again, these are part of the guidelines in the RGC submissions. The completion report would be rated, and as I said earlier, it is important for researchers to complete your research satisfactorily. Finally, there is a disciplinary committee, and the disciplinary committee is to oversee the policies on handling alleged improprieties. Actually, a year ago, this disciplines or recommendations were set up or managed by individual panel chairs. So it leads to some difficulties because the recommendations may not be uniformly applied across the different committees. So since last year, we have set up a single disciplinary committee to look at all the cases that requires attention. And this disciplinary committee is responsible for assessing the degree of the improprieties and making recommendations. So therefore, after the investigation, the PI has the right to appeal against RGC's decisions on the penalty. So that is so much for what I want to talk about, and let me stop at this point, and then we can start with the parallel session.